Welcome to the Progression Health Podcast. I'm here with Spencer Basset. Spencer, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners?
My name's Spencer Basset. Over the past 3 years, I started a YouTube channel that was mostly based around kind of like philosophy, psychology called Thoughts on Thinking. And over a period of time, I kind of developed that into wanting to create a kind of consultation service, coaching around like problems that most people deal with, stuff like, procrastination, time management, and other aspects of like psychology, like Jungian psychology. And I basically was do one-on-one working with people one-on-one. And that's it at the moment. And yeah.
Nice. So what would you say you specialize in out of all those areas that you mentioned in terms of the work you do on a one-to-one basis?
Yeah, I'd say like procrastination is the big one because I think it merges into a lot of other things as well at the same time. So it's very much a banner term with a lot of other kind of issues within psychology because obviously it features time management, it features a lot of things to do with bad habits, habit formation psychology, because with procrastination, usually the problem is that it's the accountability that doesn't exist there to push that person through, or at least the accountability is missing. And then the coach comes into their lives in a sense and allows the accountability to push them forward with the thing that they're struggling with. So it's usually accountability, time management, bad habits, habit formation, psychology, and procrastination in general. And then I'm also tapping into a lot of Jungian psychology aspects as well, like shadow work, as we're going to talk about quite a bit, because that also is massively featured within it. But it's like a kind of like an extension or a different breed of psychology with Carl Jung and all of that.
Nice. So in terms of like health and health habits, I think in my own experience, if I have like a tough workout coming up, that's when procrastination really kicks in. And I'm like,
Mm,
I start to tell myself, oh, I'm preparing. I need to take extra time to prepare, for example. But really, when it comes down to it, I'm just procrastinating. So,
yeah.
in your opinion, what's going on there? And how could someone who struggles with procrastination around exercise or a health habit, how could they kind of work through that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different models you can kind of take with procrastination. So one that I've kind of been delving into a little bit recently is the idea that there's three forms of yourself on a time frame. So you kind of have your past, present, and future self. And then a lot of the time people are, when it comes to procrastination, it's usually a kind of a loop or a cycle between their past and present self rather than their present and future self. So it's like the present self of you today with someone who's procrastinating is often always going back to past experiences, past judgments of themselves, to reaffirm them not to do the thing that they want to do today to get it out of the way, or the thing that they want to do to kind of push forward with their plan. And a lot of that is steeped in many different fears of judgment, fear, or many different fears, really. And usually it's that kind of cycling. So, like, for example, if you're saying potentially, like, let's say you're doing a marathon or a big extensive run, the procrastination might kick in for someone in that instance because maybe they would be kind of thinking about their past more to reaffirm what's going on in their present day. Let's say if someone who's never done a marathon before and they're coming up to doing it now, and but the fact that they have never done it before, there's that big area of uncertainty. So there's a fear of judgment from other people. There's a fear of uncertainty itself, which is going to reaffirm maybe not doing what they want to idealistically do. So it's something that stops and comes in the way. And a lot of the time when it comes to working around that, it's more of a philosophical matter of mindset because it's more about knowing thyself, which is a big Greek kind of term, which I think is more fundamental with a lot of this stuff. To understand yourself and how you mentally compartmentalize things within your life so that you can kind of unravel it and kind of work through those issues. Yeah.
Very interesting. So can you think of any kind of client or personal examples of this in practice where someone was like, they got to know themselves or you got to know yourself better and you maybe work through a plateau or a procrastination kind of challenge?
Yeah. So at the moment, I'll give you a small example, but this is a new client I've got on at the moment. And a lot of the things that he mentioned recently, where I'm going to be doing a more extensive talk with him today, is his behaviors as forms of sublimation, which is a defense mechanism within psychology. So sublimation is when, let's say, you have a guy who's very frustrated with his boss and he wants to take something out on his boss, but what he ends up doing is he ends up sublimating that energy into going to the gym and really working the bag really well. So that's kind of like sublimation. So he's avoiding. It's basically a defense mechanism where he's avoiding an action to into a more acceptable action socially, right? So, but with this individual, it was more like this person was dealing with trying to work. So you say you've been drinking a lot, which is obviously a big health problem. So, drinking out a lot with his friends, and then putting a lot of his free time into kind of just dumping his dopamine cycles into social media and YouTube and stuff like that. And he was like, I feel like I'm only working at a 30% rate at work. He wants to up his work ethic. He wants to make it more efficient. But the problem in this instance is he's kind of trapped in putting a lot of his kind of energy into that which isn't most suitable for him. So he's kind of sublimating what he really needs to work through into these other outlets that are not as good for anyone really to really have a proper break. So it's kind of like someone who's a workaholic, or has like Superman syndrome in the sense that they work a lot, they overwork themselves, but they don't really take care of the fact that they need to actually have proper breaks in the day. And the fact that they don't take that into account causes this sublimation or this kind of change of behavior, which isn't really as efficient as it could be. So that type of thing needs to be mended, and then like the habits of that need to be reformed. So that individual like needs to understand how habit formation psychology works in a behavioristic way so that they can readapt what that issue is into something that's more efficient for themselves. So that's got a lot to do as well with people who simply just don't look after themselves on a more leisurely basis when they're always working, because we're in such a workaholic kind of culture.
So someone could have a life stress, a work stress,
Mm.
and just kind of overuse this tool of working hard, and maybe get fitter physically or stronger physically, or maybe improve their nutrition. But whatever issue that came up originally is still there. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. It's still there. I mean, you have it with as well, like even like let's say this is a big thing with health, and I don't think a lot of people tapped into this with the idea of shadow work. So the idea of shadow work basically is the idea that the shadow in the Jungian sense is parts of yourself that you've experienced that you repress and avoid from yourself, and that you don't really observe introspectively anymore. So you kind of avoid it. And metaphorically, it's the idea that, you have a shadow and it follows you around, but you don't see it because you're doing whatever you're doing for your own body on a daily basis. But that idea, so you have the idea of that, and then the big thing that is in relation to health of this is people who don't observe their emotions, right? So if you have trapped emotions, that can lead into a lot of issues as well, because if you have trapped emotions, then you are maybe you're going to, of course, sublimate those trapped emotions into avoidant behaviors. So maybe overworking, overexercising, overeating, so to not deal with those emotions that you have and to avoid them. And that, of course, is all health based. And of course, if you're someone who finds it difficult to approach those emotions and see them for what they are, that can develop into all sorts of stuff like hypertension, um, hypervigilance. There's these different forms of behavior where your body is going to have to adapt to the fact that you are pushing something away from yourself. Because a famous quote that Carl Jung says is, what you resist persists. So if you resist something, it's going to keep persisting inside your own mind and your psyche and your body in a different way because you're not accepting what it is to observe it. And that's a big thing with, I think a lot of people, I don't think many people in healthcare really go into that Jungian idea of the shadow repression, mostly, in relation to actual physical health. But I do think it's a big thing because I'm sure things to do with heart attacks, cardiovascular, coronary artery disease, all sorts of stuff like just stress itself is heavily related to repression of certain things that we don't want to deal with.
So if I'm hearing you right, someone could, exercise regularly, look after their health, do all these kind of, we'll call them micro habits, but the kind of the bigger things of their emotions that they feel on a day-to-day basis aren't being dealt with. So it's like there's only so much improvement to their health they can make when they haven't dealt with these emotions. Is that kind of fair to say?
Absolutely. If someone is because the thing is, you can have certain people that work out too much or they overwork themselves. So you have, like I said, the example of Superman syndrome, where people just work all the time. They don't really give themselves a break, or they over exercise, or they, overeat, or all these types of things. These are kind of behaviors to distract the individual from other things that are more uncomfortable. So definitely your health's definitely limited if you don't holistically in some way kind of approach yourself in the best way possible with dealing with these certain emotions, wherever they may be. Because I'm only recently kind of trying to develop like a program for shadow work, or what would be better called, what would it be better called for, which is reconciliation with yourself, because it's more, so there's a lot of misconception with the shadow work stuff. People say, oh, it's integrating your dark side and all of this type of thing, but this is like it's all very an amoral approach to the idea because it's a very spiritual idea and people put a lot of these interpretations onto it. But it's mostly just integrating that which you have avoided from yourself, which is mostly trauma. So a lot of stuff like childhood trauma, and then the categories of how that formulates, which I've been working on quite a bit as well, which I'm trying to term the trinity of the shadow. So there's like three parts of the shadow that cause shadow content. So things like when you're younger, if you experience gaslighting, disencouragement, and what was the other one? Gaslighting, disencouragement, and neglect. If you experience things like that, that can cause things to be repressed within yourself, depending on your experience. And because of that, you then kind of have these parts of yourself that you've experienced that are hidden away that you then probably later on will have to approach again to kind of integrate it back so that you overcome that problem. So a lot of things with neglect, disencouragement cause a lot of things to do with the shadow. So for example, if you're a child and you're never encouraged to do something, you're going to have very low confidence. You're going to struggle a lot with dealing with certain things, or being your own person who puts yourself forward in life, or just simply pushing yourself into situations that are uncertain, so that you have your own courage. And usually if someone has experienced very little encouragement in their early life, then it's usually there is a big confidence issue within themselves, and they have to build that up for themselves because that's part of their shadow, which is kind of being disregarded in a sense.
This is fascinating work. Very, very interesting. So you're making me think of dealing with difficult emotions and like meditation and exercise. So where would meditation fit in? Because obviously you have to sit with yourself, and there's the quote, it's like some quote something along the lines of like the biggest failing of man is his difficulty to sit with his own emotions in a
Oh
quiet
yeah,
room. Yeah. So
yeah.
is meditation a treatment, and is exercise a potential treatment, or is it simply like the therapeutic approach, that kind of, old school sitting down on a couch and getting to grips with your emotions with a therapist?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a mixture of all those because I would say less so the kind of traditional psychoanalytic approach because I think the more I've kind of looked into psychoanalysis, the DSM-5, all of that stuff, psychological labeling, people like Thomas Saz who talks about how mental illness is not real because of psychological labeling and the effects of labeling itself onto people and how that conditions people is a big thing. So, but exercise and meditation, things like that, that's a lot within like cognitive behavioral theory. So, CBT therapy. And that's very relevant for a lot of stuff like that. So journaling obviously is a big thing, and journaling is basically a form of meditation because it's a form of introspection. So if you're having introspection or retrospection and you're thinking deep on these things, then journaling, of course, meditation is going to be very useful because I think that's mostly the formula for most of these things is to actually observe these feelings. And because you can't really cure anything unless you see it first. You have to be able to see it first to cure it, or to at least reconcile it. And I think the big problem with so even psychoanalysis or psychiatry is that the problem of, I mean, this is a big problem in America as well, with the whole kind of categorizing people's identities with terminology that developed from psychiatry, and then people falling into that with a victim mentality. So, like people say, "Oh, I have OCD," or "I have bipolar personality," or "I have anxiety disorder." I have, all of these terms. The sad thing that really frustrates me when I see it is people fall into these categories with a victim mentality of uh, uh, of the categorization put on the personality as that which overcomes them, rather than them overcoming it, which is annoying because it's the psychiatrists or even the people who, big pharma and stuff like this that kind of promote that mindset because no one is really trying to work with people to allow them to push through it so that they aren't on medication that really they don't need to be on. So a lot of medication, like people are over medicated in America insanely. There's one thing I noticed massively when I come in here is the medication, but also the supplementation in stores. There's so much more supplement because there's so much more stuff here anyway. But the medication is unbelievably there's so much medication, over medication with all sorts of different drugs that you'd have never heard of until you go to America even, especially antidepressants. And that's a big problem because it limits people's uh, their ability to understand themselves. You can't truly understand yourself if you are medicated so much that you can't really sit with yourself because the medication cuts your ability to really actually sit with yourself in a way where you can actually try and go work through these things, through these processes of journaling, meditation, and all of these different methods. I mean, like a lot of the other stuff I do is I have created like worksheets that are kind of more based within forms of or strategies of ways that you can journal. So things to do with self-compassion, uh, different philosophy methods like Socratic questioning, but through a therapeutic method. I mean, a lot of things like role modeling is based within cognitive behavioral theory as well. I mean, you have the idea of role modeling certain Stoic philosophers and how through their moral compass they would kind of navigate their day, and how you would then match up your personality or your ambitions to the idolization of those individuals. I mean, that's another thing as well that you can do with some people that is very useful, especially if they really like philosophy and they really look up to certain people with great strengths, such as like maybe Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, all those types of individuals. But but yeah, to your point, like meditation is very, it definitely fits in with that. But then of course there's these many problems of psychiatry that are becoming very obvious, and how it's really proving itself to not be a science because, and that's a big argument that you have as well within that type of community where they say, well, it's not really a true science. And in a sense, it isn't because the subjective is the objective. Your subjective experience is the objective of how you understand yourself. So science is more about trying to figure out what the objective truth is. But with psychiatry or psychology, the objective truth is the subjective truth because it's well, what you've experienced. So that's a big thing that people don't really realize that much in that field, I think.
Interesting. Yeah. To your point, I was at the doctor recently about a couple of weeks ago. I took a depression questionnaire and they recommended, based on the result of the questionnaire, that I try antidepressants. And I was actually going into that appointment thinking, you know, I want to be healthier. I want like that kind of better mental health. I want to improve my well-being. I hope I get prescribed antidepressants because this is going to help me. And I kind of thought about it after the fact. And, you know, I spoke to my kind of my community and people I have like mentors and stuff, and kind of just leaned into community and human connection. And that really was what made the difference. I think human connection, like really, you know, almost was a cure for the depression, because I'd actually heard about that as well. You know, some people had mentioned in Portugal, you know, they decriminalized a lot of drugs and they focus for addiction. They focus on human connection. So I was kind of like, you know what, I'll try and, you know, go kind of a more of an internal route to improve my mental health. And I feel like that's what you're kind of getting at, as opposed to reaching externally for supplements or for medication or for a diagnosis. You're talking about going internal. So how would someone kind of start that process of going internally to improve maybe their physical health? You know, could they do it on their own, or would it require to work with a coach, to work with a therapist, you know, over the long term to see change?
Yeah, it really depends because with the society we live in now, it's like, what level of convenience are we comfortable with? Because it's like society makes everything so convenient now. Like you have convenience stores, but also you have the fact that psychoactive drugs are available so easily. It creates this convenience of, well, I don't need to put the responsibility onto myself to actually help myself. I can just put the responsibility onto the doctor, and then he acts as the authority figure for me to kind of basically submit to, in a sense. But like so it depends on what level of comfortability you are at with living a convenient lifestyle, because we all live it to some degree a convenient lifestyle because we live in the modern world. But it depends on that, and then I'd say like just simply stepping into the gym and just showing up is the big thing. Because even with martial arts, as I was like saying before we started recording this, with the BJJ and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that recently started, it's simply about showing up, and just the action of that itself is way better than just kind of not committing to it, because it's like even reactive behavior is kind of like it's not proactive. So like if you want to be proactive, you have to think forward in a sense where you make a plan instead of react to a situation that has happened to you. So someone, for example, let's say like they haven't had the best diet or whatever, and then by the fact that they know that, you know, that diet themselves that they have that's not good is going to affect them negatively in the future, but they keep feeding into that let's say really bad diet, and then they get something horrible later on, of some disease or whatever, or some sort of illness. That's kind of like living reactively, because at that point when they realize that they've gotten sick, they will then react to, okay, how do I fix myself? But if you want to be proactive or live proactively, You need to look at right now, okay, what can I do to stop this and then change it so that I don't actually end up in the situation that I don't want to be in the future. That will then actually cause you to change instantly, you know? So trying to have a proactive mindset as well is super important. Predetermine what's going to happen to you in the future if you don't change these things that you need to change. Um, for me, at least, when I started working out, I started doing calisthenics back in Ireland when I was like 18 in this like barn in the middle of nowhere because I had all these things. I'd buy them online and then try and fill this little cow barn up with all these calisthenic tools and stuff. I started that, and then that really helped with my own self-perception in the mirror, you could say. So your own mirror image of yourself. Because, like you could say, well, what what is first, physical strength or mental strength? Which do you need first? It's kind of like for me, it was like physical strength because you then have the ability to ground yourself with a sense of confidence when you build something up at least to some degree. So even that is pretty profound when you at least start seeing development and the fact that you can contract certain muscles in your back or whatever, that initial kind of feeling of growth is super powerful, I think. But but yeah, kind of putting your best foot forward in it with a proactive mindset is probably the best way of doing that. And I don't think you really need a coach. You really just need to kind of see with a good set of eyes of what, especially if someone's in a bad state with knowing themselves that they're kind of unhealthy with food and being really honest with yourself. Because again, that's again in relation to the shadow. If you're honest with yourself and you don't have an avoidant attitude with relation to things that you're trying to push away from yourself and repress, then that's the best way forward.
So with your own training, you're just touching on it there. You know, how does it kind of tie into your personal myth? I've seen, you've posted a few times about personal myth on your channel on YouTube, which is very entertaining. And also kind of symbolism, like what does your training symbolize for you?
Yeah. So like the symbolism is really interesting because I kind of intertwine it a lot with religion now because I'm a Christian and I like I used to be into a lot of spiritual stuff, a lot of kind of new agey stuff, but then I kind of got away from that because I was just like it's not very accountable in the sense of that, the more I was working into spirituality and looking into these ideas, the more I realized that had a very vague moral structure. So morally, it's very um, loose and it can create all sorts of misinterpretations. And religion itself, or at least religiosity, with let's say the main Abrahamic religions, they're a lot more. They have more integrity to themselves. They're much more accountable systems that you can kind of work with. And then when you actually do start to read scriptures of these religions, that I don't think most people obviously have read the Bible, but really very few people have actually read the Bible in totality, like the full Bible. And there's a lot of wisdom within it that gets very misinterpreted a lot from different types of people and stuff. But one thing I do like about working out and fitness is like how in Christianity there's a lot of interconnections with it. So this is like glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. So it's like glorify God in your body. That's the first thing it says in relation to the temple of God or in relation to how to actually glorify God. So it's saying glorify God in your body. So that's basically for your physical body in some sense. And that is very a very affirmative kind of message, especially when a lot of people say, oh, Christianity is very like an anti-life religion. I hear that quite a lot with like Nietzschean philosophy, where he's like, oh, Christianity is kind of like a weak religion, when it's really not. I mean, there's a lot of things within Christianity that very much affirm strength. Affirms like glorify God in your body by obviously acting out the laws of the moral laws of God talked about in the gospel and the message, the teachings of Christ and all of this, but also just general strength. It's there's a lot of misconceptions with it. So I like intertwining kind of like religion with working out because it gives a heaviness to it. If you have like a philosophy that you want to embody, it's always good to develop a personal myth for yourself, a philosophy for yourself, because if you really want to embody it, it adds a very heavy weight to your own accountability because it's especially if you're very a certain minded individual where you have very strong principles. So that's also very good if you want to get into working on your health, is that you build up principles that are based in like very strict philosophies that you can ground yourself in, that you like a lot. And there's all sorts of things that you can pick and choose from that, which all very much resemble the same kind of archetypal structure of, following rules and certain principles. So that's also very good for people to kind of steep themselves in if they don't have, um, let's say, if they don't have a lot of integrity with themselves when it comes to being consistent, because it's more about consistency. And if you want to try and develop a philosophy around consistency, then it's good to tap into a lot of different philosophies and read them and try and understand how they relate to you. That would definitely help.
That's a very interesting point and very relevant for me personally too. So with my own coaching, I've gone from focusing on fat loss, which I feel like a lot of the fitness industry focuses on, getting abs, getting lean, to more internalizing fitness and making it more about like, kind of like your mood and your confidence, your mental health, your mindset, even like, physiological markers like, your blood glucose, heart rate, fitness levels, all these kind of things. So just internalizing as opposed to externalizing. And I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about. You're talking about having almost like, I feel like a transcendent goal as opposed to, oh, I want to, get fitter so I can have more sex or more money or
Oh
status or
no.
friends.
Yeah, that's the
So
big because it's like I think that's a big movement as well, is the aesthetic material movement with bodybuilding. It seems to be like getting more popular recently. There's a lot of influencers now where this excessive focus on aesthetic and the addictions that come with fitness as well, which is a paradox, right? You'd think that there's good habits with fitness, but really there's loads of bad addictions that you can develop with fitness, like steroid use, um, body dysmorphia from steroid use. There's all sorts of stuff like that as well that come into play, and I think the thing that makes it kind of transcendent with this type of stuff, especially even with martial arts and with physical training, is if you view yourself always with a very strong degree of humility. And this relates to the ego as well, because you have ego lifting. But like if you always step into these initiation routines with fitness, martial arts, whatever it is, with an air of humility, that's where the real strength is that you can have within yourself. Because everyone has an ego, but everyone's always trying to battle with their ego in relation to how they're trying to project an image onto other people, how they want to be seen by other people, how they don't want to be judged in certain ways. But if you can really ground yourself in humility when it comes to stepping into the gym for the first time ever, stepping into this dojo for the first time ever, being humble in the sense that I'm going to learn how to build these techniques and all that stuff, that's the biggest lesson that you can learn, because you're always going to fail. You're always going to fail with everything. So if you could be humble and be have a lot of humility to yourself and then fail, then you're not always going to be put down and then ultimately really fail when you give up on things, because failure is part of the progression of life, right? You have to go through failures to progress and then to grow. But if you have a prerequisite of your mindset, which is humility, then you can never really fail. You can never really give up because you expect, not expect the worst, but you expect to be, in a sense, not God, because that's the thing with ego inflation. People believe there's some sort, they're their own little demigods of the world, or that they believe that they're, you know, very being very boisterous and being very up their own arse and all this other stuff. So being humble and learning how to be humble is super relevant, super important.
That's fascinating. So I feel as though, yeah, when people are going after the sex, money, status, they're trying to become a god.
Mm,
And when they're focusing on something transcendent outside of themselves, kind of like I've heard Peterson say before, like before he's kind of changed his tune recently, but about, doing things that are good for you, but everybody else in your life, not just primarily good for you. So I feel as though having a transcendent goal with your working out in the gym or eating better, you're kind of putting yourself to the side, and you're sort of you're being I don't want to say a servant. You're being you're serving more than yourself. You're serving something outside of yourself. Could you just
yeah.
speak a little bit more to the difference between improving your health for materialistic values versus a transcendent value? I feel like this is a really important point.
Yeah. I mean, even that itself, you have a lot of interesting esoteric ideas around that because of within Gnosticism, you have the idea of the demiurge, which is supposedly this, through their belief system, this god that has trapped humans into the material realm, um, and all of this type of stuff. And there's other gods that are like, oh, we have to escape this trapping of what this god has done to us in this material world and all this type of thing. But what you're kind of saying there, where you're becoming your own god by chasing these material things, is kind of like becoming your own demiurge god in the sense that you're enwrapping yourself in these material goals, which ultimately not going to actually be fulfilling, which is very similar to that idea itself, where you're kind of through that worldview becoming that which has trapped you on this earth, which is this whole demiurge idea of this god that has trapped you in the material world and all of this. But that's if you believe in that whole Gnosticism stuff, because there's all these different discrepancies of these different religious views and all of that. But yeah, there's definitely this. I think a lot of that is just down to kind of, because that's another thing you had. You have a lot of material obsession with certain kind of influence, especially in like the red pill community, where you have like the Andrew Tates and all this type of stuff, where they're like super hyper focused on. They have like a good message when it comes to work ethic, but then this hyper obsession with materialism that comes from kind of forms of that is very kind of like due to the fact of not having a lot of young guys, at least, not having good father figures to kind of bring them up in a sense, who were like fathers that were really grounded in the earth or working with their hands and 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 being able to learn what it means to have a good work ethic and not try and strive for all these kind of material successes and desires and possessions and everything, because none of those things are ever going to really give any peace to anyone's mind or really fulfill anyone at the end of the day, I don't think.
That's a key point. The materialist values that we have, like I mentioned already, they don't bring long-term peace. Do you have any
No.
kind of like experience with that, or with clients where like they kind of have gone down the road of just purely getting healthier just to benefit themselves? And, because in my experience, I have as well, where, I've been my quote unquote healthiest or leanest, and I've felt my most hollow, kind of like, oh, this is all there is at the top of the quote unquote mountain, So do you have any personal experience with that, or where clients have kind of got their values maybe backwards?
I mean, personal experience, there was a period of time where I was like really super hyper focused on the whole aesthetic thing. And I think you can get kind of lost in it a little bit because it's like, how would you put it? It's like you're focusing. way too much on like if people end up focusing on this like whole like material side of it, like let's say your aesthetics, and then you reach those aesthetics, and then you're like, oh wait, what was the you then get this hollow feeling of like, oh well, I've achieved this, then what does that really mean? Or that was easy, or you know, I eventually achieved that, and then the kind of the meaning of it kind of dissipates into like kind of nothingness. But that's probably because not taking, probably because you're focusing too much on the material outcome of it rather than the other forms of what can come out of that, which is general health and a strong, good well-being. Um, but with clients, I haven't had any clients where I've been like working on people with who are, like have fitness goals and stuff like that. But I have worked with a few clients where they have a lot of material possession, um, and they have a decent amount of money, and there's this kind of loss of purpose, loss of navigation for themselves, and all this type of stuff. Especially for there was one guy I was working with briefly for a period of time where he was quite old, but he kind of felt trapped within kind of like his past achievements, and he didn't really know where to go, and he had all of this like Renaissance kind of like a very old art all around his house, and he kind of felt lost in a sense. And I didn't work for a very long time because I felt he wasn't being truly authentic with me. He's trying to, I don't know what was up with that kind of client. There's some sort of discrepancy with him and why he was truly wanting to communicate with me because he was trying to, I think what the problem with that was in that communication with him is that he was trying to get me to reaffirm something for him to do that he knew deep down wasn't the right thing for him to do, which was interesting. This kind of like trying to find uh, an excuse for a behavior that's reaffirmed from an authority figure so that they then do it, which is weird. But um, but yeah, I haven't worked with too many people in fitness and stuff like that yet. But I do want to do that eventually when I kind of develop my build more with fitness. Um, maybe even with martial arts down the road. Because there's definitely a lot that can be learned from that on a mental level as much as a physical level as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like you mentioned, you got the confidence by working on your physical body. So just for your own kind of personal mental health, what has working on your health, working out done for your mental health, and like what does it kind of continue to do on a daily basis?
It's definitely kind of allowed me to sit with myself better. Like I would say, when I was a lot younger, before I did any working out or anything like that, I would usually always try and predetermine outcomes before doing them, and then the worst case scenario type of thing. And that's because probably that was kind of like an anxiety thing where I wouldn't be very confident in myself doing certain things. And then I'd kind of expect the worst to happen because I would not have strong confidence. There's all this type of stuff. But then obviously working out kind of helps reset that. And now, like for example, when I'm going to the BJJ stuff, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's like I'm just very calm doing it, and I'm very humble, and I noticed out for myself that I'm very kind of I sit very well with myself because I've kind of beforehand already pushed myself with with the fitness stuff. I've developed this stress tolerance with fitness. So that's another big thing to recognize as well, is like when you do fitness, you develop a strong stress tolerance. And that stress tolerance can then merge in with other things in your own life. So it can merge in with dealing with stresses of other things. And maybe if you have career goals and you're doing interviews with certain job interviews and all of this type of stuff, and you have tension around or you're nervous, the working out and doing these things helps relieve that. That's very noticeable with doing a lot of cardiovascular exercises as well. It definitely releases a sense of stress or tension in the body. Um, And that's why I really like a lot of Wilhelm Reich's stuff that I want to delve into more because he talks about orgone energy, which is supposed to be his idea of energy in the body and how it moves depending on your the way your psyche works. So he has this idea called body armor, which is kind of like chakras. So, but the inversion of chakras. So it's like there's certain tension areas within your body that get built up with tension. He calls it body armor because it's your body trying to armor itself from vulnerabilities. So it creates tensions in your body in different areas. So like if someone's very afraid of speaking, they get tension in their throat. Or if they're in an argument and they don't want to speak up because maybe they want to avoid the situation, they get tension in their throat. That's a form of body armor. And you get this in different areas of your body. So it's interesting to look into that as well. Maybe if people are listening to this, there's loads of interesting ideas in relation to kind of like body tension, um, body tension release, but also things to do with like even just in general cardiovascular exercises, how that helps with that a lot. And then obviously the theory behind that or the potential theory behind what that is. Um, and then, and yeah, so that as well, but I feel like working out definitely gives you a sense. That's probably the biggest thing for me is that it's through this stress tolerance of lifting heavy weights and kind of pushing yourself through it, how that kind of resets and develops your ability to deal with stresses outside of the gym as well, which I think is the biggest thing. I think that's super important.
So through strengthening your physical body, mentally you're more resilient by the sounds of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's like you create resilience through your mind by training. And that's why I'd probably say like physical strength is probably the best way to go forward with that because you're kind of hitting two birds with one stone because you're like, but you're getting the strength and the physical strength, but also you're getting the resilience of having to push through the workout, which is itself just mental resilience with anything, which is the big thing.
I love that. You're killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a really good sell for exercise or for physical exertion. So just going into the Brazilian jiu-jitsu versus working out in the gym, what do you get from, one you don't get from the other? And, why did you start doing the jiu-jitsu?
The jujitsu, so my girlfriend started doing it over here, and I just wanted to start doing it anyway. I wanted to really get into like Muay Thai, really, because I feel that's most practical to real world situations. And exerting your body in that kind of way, I feel is very effective with dealing with different things and kind of just developing more confidence within yourself. Because people can develop confidence with working out, but if they're really confronted with a nasty situation, or if they're confronted with an atmosphere where they feel like they're threatened, the working out is not really going to do much for you to an extent because if you feel like you're going to get in a fight or something, or you're going to get attacked or whatever it is, or you feel an atmosphere of tension in the air between other people, then combat is definitely, or martial arts or something like that, is definitely going to help you be more comfortable with yourself in that situation because you're taking on the responsibility of being able to defend yourself. So that's a big thing why I wanted to get into it was the air of confidence it brings through that. So it's kind of taking on more responsibility for yourself. And then also, I mean, the other benefits of it are a lot of them are psychological, I'd say. Um, there's a lot of interesting dynamics, psychological dynamics that go on in martial arts that are very similar to just like psychology terms as well. So like things like projection, because when you're going into a space where you're very vulnerable, or that you should be going into where you're very vulnerable, you have this fight between your true self and your ego, you could say. And then this is one thing I noticed. So when you go to this, if you go to a dojo and then you're kind of like the first person there, and there's all these other people there again training, they're different belt ranks and everything. They're going to project things onto you, and you're going to project thoughts onto them through your ego to protect yourself from kind of being vulnerable, right? So maybe there might be like an air of gossip, and I think that's what that really is. When the ego gets in the way of true self-development, there is like this air of gossip that develops, which is kind of features people's attempts to avoid uh judgment so that they then become like attackers of people's kind of like you kind of like have attackers and defenders within that kind of air of gossip. Like so for example, let's say you went into a dojo or whatever and you're a new guy and then there's these other people with higher belt ranks and their ego or their identity is attached to that ranking, which is the difficulty of the whole progression of the martial arts stuff. They might like start picking on that one person who's like, oh, he's a newbie, or he's this, he's probably not very good, or whatever, or maybe there might be this kind of tension, or in the situation of someone going to the gym, ego lifting, that's kind of like someone trying to defend their own ego from judgment, uh, from the gaze of other people. Because they're like, oh, I'm going to try and really lift heavy, but they can't really lift it in good form. But they're trying to defend their ego from the judgment of other people. Because with other people, that person might be feeling within that air of gossip that, oh, those other people are looking at me and they're judging me, thinking that I'm weak or whatever. So you have the ego lifters who are like trying to like, oh, I want to try and prove myself to other people, even though it's not adequate, it's not authentic, it's not authentic communication. So it's like there's this interesting dynamic of gossip that you're contending with within doing kind of like athleticism or martial arts that you have to work through. And it's always going back to humility because as soon as the ego, if it gets in the way of any of these things, it basically cuts off your progress of actually developing any skills. So like if your ego gets in the way of doing martial arts, it cuts off your ability to develop your skills because you're not going to be vulnerable to learn new ways of defense, new kind of ways of taking people down, chokeholds, submissions. You're not going to learn new ways of doing things because you have a certain belt rank that might be higher than the other people in the dojo, or you might just develop this kind of air of confidence, which isn't at the level of what the black belt is. Like, because you have the white belts and then you have the black belts, and it's like the only difference between a white belt and a black belt is just the fact that they just showed up every day. Like there isn't really anything else. And I think that's also the progression of learning martial arts is dealing with uh is the practice of always falling back into vulnerability and develop how that is the only way to really develop your skills because you can only learn because you're being taught by a sensei, you're being taught by someone who's got a black belt who has a lot of experience. As soon as you start identifying with certain movements that you commit to when trying to do grappling with someone and you develop habits and then you don't keep yourself vulnerable in situations like that, then you're going to consistently cut yourself off from further development, I think. And I think that's the big thing with that is it always comes back to vulnerability, learning to be humble, always coming back to humility and vulnerability with that stuff.
So I want to talk about the shadow, but I think ego lifting is a useful example.
Yeah.
So, based on my understanding, could someone be sort of not willing to experience the vulnerability of not feeling, impressively strong or, excessively like having this crazy strength? They can't kind of humble themselves to the level of strength that they're actually at. And they're sort of, they haven't done like maybe the necessary shadow work to lift at the level they're at. Is that a useful way to kind of look at the shadow? And can you just kind of give your own interpretation of the shadow?
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Like with the ego lifter, it's like, yeah, they may be at that position where they're like, well, I don't want to be, they want to avoid the difficulty of working through the ability to actually achieve what they want. So they want, so maybe the ego lifter basically wants the outcome, but doesn't want to put the work in. But at the same time, they know deep down that they're not getting the outcome that they want because they're not putting the work in. So they know that because their form's terrible or whatever it is. But so that's a good way of looking at it. So it's again, because it always links back to this thing of the shadow featuring things that you're avoiding. And I'd say that's a good way of looking at it. Think of like avoidant behavior, and then all of those behaviors that are avoidant behaviors, what are they avoiding? And the thing that they're avoiding is the tension that you have with that which you don't want to kind of look at properly. That's where you get a lot of defense mechanism strategies that you have in psychology as well, like sublimation, reaction formations. Um, Most defense mechanisms are in relation to your shadow, I would say, because it's always avoiding something else. So it's with the ego lifter, he's always avoiding putting in the work. He's always avoiding that. He wants it easy, but also you could have other dynamics with that as well. Someone could be ego lifting because they feel intimidated by someone else, so that they feel like they might have to prove their strength to someone else in a way that isn't the best way they can, you know. So there's always these difficulties with it, and I'd say that is the biggest thing within sports as well, is that people are constantly projecting onto each other, especially in competition, and that's probably where the biggest fight is. Because even with boxing, you have that's like 80% of the game is the build up to a fight and getting into the mind of the other individual, and how badly that then affects their actual ability to perform on the night when they're fighting. So there's so much psychological stuff that goes on within sports. There's a big side of it, I think. And I think there's people that even specialize in that, which is sports psychology, and actually coaching sportsmen or sportswomen with ways of through psychology, so that they understand how psychology works within sports and sportsmanship, so that they have a better psychological security against projection that then gets put onto them from other people.
Yeah, I had an interesting episode with a sports psychologist previously, Hugh Gilmore. He got into routines and how that can help you to kind of, it feels like almost stay with your authentic self, as opposed to getting caught up in the drama of the moment or the event. And just with the shadow as well, I'm thinking for nutrition. So it's typically advised that, you know, kind of slower is better in a dieting phase, for example, if someone's trying to get lean, right? But I think a common mistake people make is they try and do like a crash diet, and they go like no carbs, keto, intermittent fasting, all in the one or something crazy. And they kind of avoid doing the work. Would that be an example of shadow, you know, kind of the shadow kind of appearing or not doing shadow work, because they're sort of avoiding the hard work of showing up for multiple weeks or even months in a diet phase? They're trying to cram it into like 2 weeks and just kind of get a fast result.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd go to the extent that it's that because I only like using that kind of term with something that's really kind of bothering an individual on a really deep level. But you could say it's in some sense like in that kind of term, like shadow related, because well, you could say it's more from living a convenient life within our routine in a Western world. So it's like if we see things as having a degree of convenience to them, then we're going to try and apply ourselves towards a convenient kind of like routine. So it's like, okay, I'm going to just try and like apply this diet in a very quick way and expect results very quickly, because there's this diet that I can do that says that it can get me to this result very quickly and all this type of stuff. It's all very convenient kind of pathways to success. And you have that with everything. You have that with people who release like the thing is what I hate about modern day books today is that modern books or modern book writers a lot, even within like a self-development, self-help books, always trying to sell like very quick kind of like outcomes to or quick success routes. You even have that with like financial kind of books and stuff, because there's always this kind of catch of like, oh, it's it might be convenient, so therefore I can get that reward or achieve that success really quickly, when it's usually not like that at all. Um, so I'd say it's like a symptom of living a convenient lifestyle rather than a symptom of maybe like some sort of shadow aspect. But you could say the shadow is steeped in the modern psyche of men and women today, is like it's steeped in convenience. So we expect a convenient process to be there for us so that we could grasp it. And then that itself takes away um, our own ability to be consistent and um, tenacious with things. It probably takes a lot of that away from us, because then we fall into that kind of that short-term mindset, or that gratification mindset of just being someone who's sitting on the couch eating fast food, who's expecting things to be conveniently brought to them for entertainment purposes, dopamine, all of that type of stuff.
Yeah, the hard work, that's where the growth happens really. And
Yeah.
an interesting post related to hard work is that you have is master the art of failure and success will become inevitable. So could you just
Mm.
talk about, that post and mastering the art of failure, and why? Kind of sounds counterintuitive. It's like, why would you inevitably become successful by failing?
Yeah. So it's like it's dependent on people's perception of failure. So like when I'm talking about, so like Tom Platz, if people have heard of him, it's kind of like funny, that guy, because he's like a crazy bodybuilder guy. He's like known really well for his like insanely big legs. But he would always like say, train to failure, to the point where your muscles fail. Like just train till you fail. Like not in the sense of like failure as in, oh, I haven't been able to do this thing, or I can't do it, or whatever, or that I failed on this test or whatever, but in the sense of like bodybuilding or fitness, you fail by working out your muscles so successfully. So it's like paradoxically this thing, whereas like you actually achieve success by failing your body through by working out so hard and all this other thing, and then you get the result. But it's the same thing with failure, in the sense of what I was talking about with um, being vulnerable and being humble. I think there's a misconception of failure and humility. So a lot of people view success in a kind of misconstrued way. So like failure, to me, that because we're always encountering failure, it's like a philosophical thing. Like failure is necessary for growth, right? So what is required for growth, to accept failure, is to be humble, so that you learn. And being humble is kind of like the gateway of learning the most possible, or being open to learning the most possible. So having that kind of humility to yourself is kind of the gateway to learning the most from any kind of failures, because a lot of people could perceive failures as doing something incorrectly. So like if you're training let's say Brazilian jiu-jitsu or whatever, and your ego's in the way, and you keep trying to take someone down into it, or doing a certain throw, and you keep getting it wrong. But the fact that you're not, if you went into doing that with an air of humility and expectation of not getting it right or failing at that process of or that exercise or that movement, then you already expect failure. So then you're already going to adapt to that by just simply not reacting emotionally to what you're doing. So that's another big thing as well, is like you can react emotionally to getting frustrated with things that are not going your way, because you're kind of failing the the the, the process of it. But if you always step you're forward with humility, then you're never going to emotionally react as much, and then actually give up on the thing itself. Like I was looking at a good phrase or a good verse in the Bible. It's probably my favorite one within the Bible is the symbolism of the snake and the dove that is used within the um, the verse, be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. There's this kind of interesting play between opposite. I think it's super relevant for the idea of humility, but also this idea of wisdom and gentleness, or wisdom and innocence, is that it's like, how could you put it? It's like the perfect balance of what a very whole individual should be. It's like, and I believe that that's like the totality of martial arts, is that there's this strong sense of wisdom that you develop by developing the movement, and then there's that strong sense of gentleness, or being gentle as a dove, or innocent as a dove, by not being the person that is the attacker, but always being the person who falls back into self-defense. So you develop that strong sense of ability and skill, but then you develop that strong sense of gentleness at the same time, which is like basically the whole Christian message, you could say, within Christianity, but it's also in martial arts as well, to some extent, I think, because as long as it's rooted in self-defense, it's basically that. That's super interesting as well, with the symbolism and like the personal myth in relation to myself with religion, and kind of seeing how that interlinks with fitness and all these other things.
Yeah, you've kind of internalized your fitness journey. You've made it into your own personal story, as opposed to like, oh, this person on Instagram is doing this cool thing, I'm gonna adopt that too.
Yeah, that's super important. Like internalizing. If you can get the fitness into your personal myth by exploring the things that you're interested in, then it's super important. Like idolizing someone online, it's always going to kind of not work, because it's not part of your identity. If it's part of your identity, then it's an inevitable development that you're going to have. I guess it's learning what that means for it to be part of your personal myth, because you really have to go on like a journey of like self-discovery with yourself and being authentic with yourself, which takes time, because like to certain people where they're just not themselves because they have certain friends that they're very close with, and then them friends kind of, they could be like have people pleaser syndrome or something, and then they're not as authentic as they could be with other people, let alone themselves. So it can be difficult to develop that kind of adventure for oneself, or that hero's journey, you could say, or whatever you'd want to call it.
Yeah, to learn from your own experience and what's authentic to you, as opposed to your
Yeah.
peers. Yeah. So Spencer, this has been brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. Is there any kind of final message you want to mention, or links you want to point people to, things you have coming up?
Yeah, I mean, if people are interested in any of the work or any of the things I've said here, like, and you want to check out further work that I've been doing, I have a fairly big YouTube channel called Thoughts on Thinking, which is the main kind of name that I go under, which is mostly kind of like extensions of a lot of things I'm talking about here, but a lot of things within psychology, philosophy that kind of interlink and talk about to create kind of insightful conversation. And then, of course, if people are interested in the one-on-one like coaching stuff that I do, or they simply want to look into what free services I offer with kind of like discovery calls, free kind of PDF books and stuff like this, then you can check that out as well. On my Instagram, I go by like Thoughts on Thinking, at Thoughts on Thinking, and you could find everything else from my YouTube channel, which is again YouTube at Thoughts on Thinking. And yeah, that's it really. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, and I'll attach all of that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.